I
Oh,
did.
there you go. Well, we both just did.
Perfect. All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm just going to uh, take over for the next 4 hours. And when I mean take over, I'm going to be gently nudging the stop and start of each of these hour-long sessions.
Thank you,
So
Lori.
my pleasure. Welcome everyone to Memory Making and Sense Making, the Year of the Swan. This is our thought leader, Rob Tyrie, and I'm encouraging people to introduce themselves in the chat. So we want you to get to know each other and be able to connect with each other after the session. Here's my contact information. And before I actually introduce Rob into the presentation that he's going to be participating in, I just want to welcome you. And I'm Lori Farley, your captain for the next 4 hours. In Canada, it's customary for us to start every event with an acknowledgement that compared to Indigenous populations, we are all newcomers here, whether our families have lived here for months or for a century. This is part of our truth and reconciliation process with our First Nations, the Indigenous people of Canada. In this spirit, we acknowledge for all of us in a short global statement that each of us are privileged to be on the sacred land that has supported human beings for thousands of years and is rich in history, knowledge, and tradition. We are privileged to be beneficiaries and the stewards of all that has come before on behalf of the 7 generations to come and beyond. We invite you to consider the place where you are and how you honor and respect the Indigenous peoples of your place. And I'm just going to add, if people know their Indigenous lands, please feel free to share them on the chat. I am now going to hand it over to our thought leader, Rob, and he's going to be talking about the importance of making memories as part of making sense. Go ahead, Rob, if you want to share your screen. Do I need to unshare mine or can you just automatically
I can
take
just
over?
go. That's, that's great. Thank you, Lori. I think that all our new members bring new things to us, and I appreciate your sentiments. And to summarize the things of the right thing to do, to start with the truth is always a great thing. Thank you, Lori. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Thanks very much for everyone being here. I appreciate it. If anyone's been sitting down for more than an hour, please stand up or walk around or breathe or reach for the sky. That's a long time to be sitting around looking at screens. I want to thank you, Lori, my captain, captains that make things special, Augustine and Lindsay, make the day smooth. Before I get going into this, just a couple other points of gratitude. The Grey Swan Guild isn't one person. The Grey Swan Guild isn't this event. This Grey Swan Guild isn't any one of the subgroups that make it up. It's many things together, and it's not structured. It's overlapped by design. But the board was the thing that created it a year ago. Part of today in memory making is to make acknowledgments like this and pass gratitude where gratitude belongs. This is the current board that you see in front of you now. We had former board members as well, people like Vicky and Sharon and Alan Walker, who are no longer on the board, but they've had great and great service to what we did. But the members like Alex and Anna and Andrea and Bosco and Chris, Daniel, our friend Dave from the West Coast, Australian expat Canadian in Australia, Doyle, self goes out, Jennifer, Kim. I'm looking at their faces. I'm smiling. They're so wonderful. These are my friends. I met them a year ago. We started something interesting, and we brought people together. And this is part of my recognition. There's some special people that are overlapped on the board that have been helping today in special ways with Daniel, of course, and Sylvia, you saw today or heard today on journaling, and Elaine, who's always helping us be better, quicker, faster. If you registered today, if you saw the website, if you saw the events organized, that's all the genius of Elaine working in very tight order with our designers and doing design herself along with Jill to make everything look beautiful. I got taught at a very early age, if you look good, you will play good. That's what my dad used to teach me. The co-founders, Sean and Andrea, it doesn't even feel like a founding. It feels like we just had a spark of an idea, and then it's grown unto this. And I thank them all. Peace be with you. Okay, so that's my first memory of the day. And then in continuation, I want to remind people that if you haven't had a chance, if you're new and you missed some of this coming in, Sylvia and Nicola have invented a journal of the day to record what we're doing today. It's live. If someone could please paste a link in the chat if you haven't seen it. It's available to keep creating memories. It's part of the thing that we do. And I'm going to tell you about why today. Today, what I'm going to share is a little bit about sense making. We talk about this as a day of sense making. Sense making is something that's new to me. I'm not an expert in sense making. I didn't know the word sense making. When I met Sean and Andrea and we embarked on this, Andrea corrected me. I was talking about doing analysis or doing reports or doing writing together or producing publications, which I'm used to, but I was informed that we were doing something quite different, and that's sense making. And then what I learned further is that part of sense making is memory making. First, I'll just back up a second. I'm Rob Tyrie. I'm just a guy on the other end of this Zoom call. At Rob Tyrie is a pretty unique string in the world. If you search for me online in any social media, even on Clubhouse, because Augustine brought me there, it's around there. But I've been on social media since the beginning of things, but I would leave little droplets of me everywhere that way, but that's me. And then back in the background there, that's Ironstone. Ironstone is the last element that's formed in the heating of a sun before it collapses into a black star. My company is called Ironstone Advisory. Okay, sense making. Not a new idea, but it was a reaction to further knowledge and collection of information of really not coming to solutions quickly. That's called solutionism. Really, it is taking a step back and understanding completely that there's uncertainty. There are unknowns, there's known unknowns, like I don't know what the weight of the earth is, like everybody. There are unknown unknowns. Those are kind of scary. But what I'm highlighting is that within sense making, there's lots of teachers, people that have touched on it. We had the first session this morning where Wendy and the Russell, not related, Kate and Cindy, were together talking about the Cynefin organization. They did deep research in this area, and they provide tools now. So that's all of sense making, and there's little sense making and big sense making. But I'm going to take a little angle. I'm going to take one word from the definition of this idea, and that's retrospective, going back. So if you're going to make sense of something when uncertain times, something new happens, like a pandemic or something unpredictable, like hasn't happened in 100 or 200 years, looking back to the past is what people do, and it's a way of making sense. So my concept, I guess, in looking at what sense making is and understanding it better is that if you're going to do that, well, what if there were no memories? I said to myself. So I think that part of sense making when you're going through something like this is actually intentionally making memories together. I'm going to talk about why that's important. So fundamentally, if we talk about consciousness or what it is to be a human being or what it is to have thought, there are models of the brain that exist. This is a pretty simple one that I want to focus on. We've got two ways of thinking, like processing. When you think about brains, a lot of the focus is about the way we process things or the way we understand consciousness. And that's one aspect, that sort of flow of taking in information and processing it. Daniel Kahneman has invented an idea of system 1 and system 2 thinking. So it's a typo on this slide, but a way of doing things short and fast. And that's a construct, and he's proven that as Nobel Prize winning work in thinking fast and thinking slow, that human beings act differently, remember differently when they're acting on something they know really well, and they can perform very quickly. And other types of thought require deep thinking, system two, which go in and look at different constructs. And memory itself is related in the models of memory in the human brain. There's an idea that's proven that there's short-term memory, like remembering a phone number, or remembering a Zoom call, or remembering quickly what someone's name is in a conversation. And there are tricks about that, and it's different than long-term memory. Long-term memory is that deep storage that we make up. So it's not really reality, of course, because it doesn't exist ever, but it's a different process of how we do things. Maybe I can get you all to think a long way back. Everybody has a first memory. And maybe in the chat you could share some of your very, very first memories. I know that my first memory, I was a kid, and I was learning how to ride a bike. My sister had learned how to ride a bike. She was 2 years older than me. And I just remember that I rode a bike, and I couldn't believe I could ride a bike. It was kind of magical. But I remember riding her bike. It was a blue bike. And I was very, very young. But that's the first memory that I have. And if you think back, people have those. And there's one from Lori. Thanks, Lori. I remember looking at the legs of adults while I was standing under a dining room table made of dark brown wood. So it's specific like that. When you try and reach deep down beyond that, you don't have it. So there's a thing of long-term memory that we all have. I'm showing you that emotional memory, everyone has it, and it's what we do. You made that memory. And great memories have great stories too, and that's part of remembering as well. There's a different kind of memory in your brain as well, traumatic memory. And that kind of memory, and then again, science backs this up in the way we remember. And when you're remembering a traumatic incident in your life, the way your brain lights up in an fMRI machine is different. It's stored differently. So if you remember a traumatic memory or an intense memory, and this can be positive and negative, they're really remembered, and they have different aspects of how you remember them. They're more vivid, or they may be more violent, unfortunately. And I'm sorry if any of this is triggering. I'm going to be talking about some post-traumatic stress today. I warn you now, and you can always turn me off and turn off my sound if that does bother you. I don't want to upset anybody. But that type of memory is important too. In each case of these types of memories, the idea would be that since they're here and we're populated on the planet, they're all part of humans and why we're successful on the planet. So short-term memory, long-term memory, and traumatic memory all combine to make us human and make us survive. So in the case of short-term memory, it may be important to be able to react to a car coming at you in the wrong direction, and you know how to turn your car instantly based on that instant information. Long-term memory may be important to finish that studying so you can do the exam to pass your final grades. Traumatic memory, it may be important to remember that when you hear that rumbling sound, it is a Tyrannosaurus Rex and you better run. So they're all useful, and they're put together. So, oops. With traumatic memory, during historic events that draw us together, as a human being, there's this unusual circumstance that happens, that there's fundamental things that occur that everybody remembers where they were when. Sometimes it's, again, a joyful experience, like the first concert you went to, or a first world concert that you heard of. But in other bigger incidents, like the moon landing or the death of Princess Di, this draws people together in long incidents and huge dramatic incidents like World War II, World War I, or the pandemic. What we have is a focus of humanity all on one thing. We're all thinking the same thing. And what is possible in historic events, if you take a step back, is to look at them a different way. These historic events have proven to generate a lot of narrative, a lot of stories, a lot of analysis. And it's interesting what can happen when you look at patterns across different cultures, like we learned this morning, how to collect that information and just compare it in different ways and let some science cluster things together. In making sense of the world, what I was realizing that the beginning of the pandemic, in a big shift. The projects I was working on weren't as important anymore. And what I wanted to do is come up with a way of making sense of what was going on, first and foremost, as a reaction to just protect my family. And it's my method of protecting things is trying to understand what's going on by studying studying the news or current events and comparing that to the past, and seeing what happened before, maybe to predict what was going on next. When we started the guild and the first project of the guild, it was about gathering some people that are very smart. And then what I understood from this kind of understanding is that the pandemic would cause us to focus a certain way, and there'd be very interesting advice, very interesting empathy that would occur in developing stories that I thought would be important to have for the people close to me and share with everybody that I could and we could arrange to share it with. So when you think back a year ago, March 14th, or maybe it was January, when in China and Wuhan the first novel coronavirus was identified and was indicated that it might be an epidemic. And the words novel and coronavirus are, whenever compared, or novel disease or novel infectious disease, gets the attention of world bodies like the WHO right away, because they might turn into something terrible, and you've got to watch them, and the world bodies and world science watches them carefully because they might impact. By the time it hit March a year ago, and then it was clear that it was in multiple countries, that travel across borders was impacting and spreading a disease that wasn't well understood, wasn't a cure, there wasn't much defense, as Dr. Fourcade was indicating in her experience directly in the emergency room. When you're away from the center of things, though, all you can do is process. And there's this idea of uncertainty and complexity, and there's all this mess of information. And the basic question you've got to ask yourself is, what did you do, or what could you do? In some cases, I saw some of my friends who are in engineering that reacted by trying to solve immediate problems with their skills that maybe directly related to their skills of engineering, but they wanted to apply them against emergency room medicine or build ventilators. It's an unusual reaction. I'm surrounded by analysts, so what we did was we wrote, and we read, and we studied, and we reacted. If you want to make a comment and add to what you were thinking of a year ago, or why you reacted, please do. If you flag me or raise a hand with a reaction, I'll stop and we can share this part. This is interactive. This part, I want to make some memories with you and share them just like I started. So please chime in. The Space Shuttle Challenger exploding. Crisis. I saw it on television and I stopped to do that. Just like I love space travel, and I know where I was when that happened. Those are recent past. Now, in response to that, when it's a type of thing that's instantaneous like that, in that moment, is that flash of where you were. When something long rolling, like a world war, I think that the reaction is there's more analysis that occurs. So Luke from New York, hi Luke. I used a work technique, scenario planning, in order to understand future possibilities. Scenario planning, great idea in that it's a response to not coming to a conclusion too quickly and understanding there might be a lot of solutions. So why just guess one thing, maybe add some assumptions and look at a good, bad, worst case scenario, or adjust things accordingly to have better reactions so you can set up flexibility. So complex problems tend to have complex solutions. That's a great one, Luke. Thanks for that. I'm sure that the scenario planning will continue as we go through different waves and adjustments as we learn more to untangle some of the uncertainty that's in place right now. So scenario planning is certainly a method, and it's a kind of specific scientific narrative. But I do remember one thing specifically. At the beginning of the pandemic, when we did our very first General Assembly, and I was at a spot and to do something, and I was trying to not think the way I thought before. And I was obviously concerned about what was going on in March. Um, and instead of doing what I'd normally do, which was present a chart or some statistics or maybe a scenario, I found a poem. And this is the poem that I thought of, that when I thought of the pandemic and I thought about the danger in March a year ago, I thought about Emily Dickinson in a poem that she wrote, because so many people had died, and that was the top thing on my mind. So the poem is beautiful. I'm going to read it. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had to put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where the children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of grazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet, only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feel shorter than the day I first surmised the horse's head were toward eternity. Poetry is memory. It's got some tricks to it. It's got some structure. It's got some use. It's got rhyme. It's got timbre. It's got rhythm. It's how we write verse, and it was a way designed. It's probably a very human thing for us to remember things. So for me, this was a bit of solace during a terrible time, and we turn to things like that to remember. These are tools we can create. There are lots of types of memory making tools. Error lists in books and news and TV, movies, stories. If you could drop in the chat a book or a movie about that when you were beginning at the pandemic, what did you respond to? What did you look to? What resonated? Plays, poetry, like I did. Plots and tropes are the generic idea. That's great. Luke asked me why I didn't add music to that. I'd make a mistake, an error. Music, absolutely. I know I've got a pandemic playlist. At the top song on that pandemic playlist is "We Didn't Start the Fire" by Billy Joel. But music too are these memory making tools. They stick with memory. They're with us either to give us solace or to help us remember. Plots and tropes, those constructs, well, each of the other types of memory making tools, these are the DNA of a memory making tool. So if you've got a plot, like the simplest plot of the world in any story is the beginning, middle, and end, that simplest arc. There's the 5-act play from Shakespeare. These things are useful because they're almost like, again, machines, and that we remember them well, we remember them for a long time, and then some of them have gifts to us, like an old plot or that line, Joseph Campbell, the hero's journey, where it's threaded through many stories that are told in the West, many male stories about beginning in uncertainty, getting lost and getting disaffected, and finding oneself, and then joining with a group of people to solve a common problem, and then come back around in full circle to where you started, is a common trope that happens. And what is that story? Can we build that again for this pandemic? Are we making it now? So these are kinds of memory machines that are useful. So as I was trying to think about what to do in looking at how memories are created and how sense making could occur, I had an idea. that if you used events that were repeated over and over again are very, very big and a moment in time. So the event's important that it exists. The events before the event and after the event, there's some kind of change. So I, I thought that you could take an event together as in a group and then use content. So content powered, these plots and stories are memory machines. And the idea here is to try and create a sense making tool that makes memories that feeds into overall sense making. So this idea of event driven content powered influencer sense making generation. So the hypothesis again, so you start with a moment in time, whether it's a date like April 15th and it's Day of the Swan, or it may be the weekend, or maybe the winter solstice, a moment in time that doesn't move, so that there's pressure and intensity that frames things. Content, personal narrative. So rather than just using data, use those stories that we remember well or we create. So some of the stories that were created, like that poem by Emily Dickinson, was invoked by a funeral. It was invoked by an important event in her life, and she wrote that poem in the moment. Emily Dickinson was extremely prolific. Not well published until after death, but very prolific. She wrote in the moment. And however, she made a machine that lasted in time because it was driven by an event. Wrote a certain construct, and poetry was very structured in what she did. So that's memorable. And it was a personal narrative. And then the last element to this is to try and get influencer leaders or people who think they're leaders. I don't think there's any difference. That have vibrant networks, so that the chance could be that those influencers, once they were all focused on a single event at that point in time, create narratives together, and then the idea is that they kind of might overlap, so they're easy to knit together to feed into sense-making machines or to leave rest to come see them again. So just like if you think about what Sylvia invented with Nicole on the journal, this is point in time, it's today, where she invoked and invited personal narrative and pictures and storytelling and different things. And then if you were listening carefully, she was giving prompts throughout. Nicole was giving prompts. So those help people just insight, maybe something inside that just nudges a little further to get a story out. And if the construct is simple, like I asked earlier what your memory was, I'm sure that everyone's got a memorized poem that they remember from their childhood. There's one that showed up that I always remembered. I think everyone remembers that lines up with the pandemic, and it's ring around the rosy, a pocket full of posies, husha, husha, we all fall down. Everyone knows that poem, I think, in the West at least. I don't know if it goes right across the world, but that poem was born of pandemic. That poem was a construct to defend against what was unknown and uncertain. Ring around the rosy was the type of that plague type of sore that you would get in the plague. It came to the surface of your skin, would be a ring around a lesion that was red. That's ring around the rosy. A pocket full of posies. The posies were supposed to be defense against an awful plague. And husha, husha, we all fall down was trying to protect your children by not being too graphic. But husha, husha was the sound of someone dying of a lung disease. And all fall down is death. So that memory machine passed down from generation to generation was a machine to remember to protect a community. So influencers thought of the poem, passed it down. That made sense of the time and the science they had at the time to help save the community. So these event-driven, content-powered influencer sense-making generation, this idea, I think it's possible. And I'm going to show you some of the experiments that we've been doing in the Guild to build these things out, because it's very difficult to go from individuals to a community. There's two different energies that, although they overlap, every individual in a group is part of a community. Every community is made up of individuals. But when we try and make rules and policies and memories together, they're quite different. Okay. Any questions? If you drop them in the chat, I will address them. Hey, Luke, I can see your picture now. So in the Grey Swan Guild, we move very quickly in some cases. We are very planful in other cases. We got people bringing decades of experience and techniques together. Our approach in the groups that I'm in tend to make experiments. We use an experimental process. We invent these things, we try them. If they are broken, we try different things. So one of the big experiments that is consistent in many groups is to ask open-ended questions of people. These are new to me. I didn't ever thought of asking anyone for a point of view. I didn't know what a point of view was. I was taught what a point of view here was, a point of view paper. So not a white paper, not a thought paper, not a thought leadership paper, but a point of view. Just what is your point of view? What's your basis? Give us some evidence or give us some background and experience, and then just write it down. And do that over and over in different constructs. Our first wave publication was like that. And other things that we do are like that. The second experiment was to analyze current events and news in a constructed way. That every week, so one of the things that occurred in doing the bigger projects is there was more analysis required and more energy to get a group all aligned together to create what we were calling waves, to publish together in a aligned way. And we could only do so many of those. So we tried to find a way to move quicker, to do more analysis quickly, but too intense though. To not only do it every week, collect this information every week, but with at certain points in quarter and later on to actually build a body of knowledge that's quite large. The third experiment underneath this is to try and do things the same way. So when we collect information, there's a certain lightweight form around it that we collect in open ways, that we make the information searchable, we break it up and we send it out in lots of pieces so that people see it and inspect it. There are other processes. And we try and connect the dots every once in a while. Those are the general themes across all these experiments, so that we can kind of create a library, which humanity has been doing over and over again. So individuals create things and they collect them in certain ways so that they're accessible and you can get them and use them again just in case you need them. So that third experiment is the library, which we're just starting on, which is a very fascinating project to see if we can get it done. The living journal that Sylvia and their team designed as part of that library. It's part of the same mechanism. It's a different experiment that just got started, and I hope that it lasts all year. So these are some of the results of the experiment. Sometimes these experiments aren't evident when they start. When it started and we did the first round in the first wave publication, it was a struggle because we didn't know what the end would look like, but it's a collection of short form point of views. Daniel wrote one, Augustin did not write one, I don't believe. I wrote a short one as well. You want one as well? Yeah? Good. No. So,
not the first one, the second one.
Oh, you were in the second wave. Yeah, there were two waves. So the collection, 60 of them, was when individually they didn't seem like much, but when you actually print them, that's when it kind of hits you how big the report is. It ends up being a 140-page report with extra analysis and very structured. That was the first wave publication. The second wave publication, which Daniel led on and Jennifer helped with, that one ended up all on the website, and as a collection, they're not as analyzed as the first wave, but they're there and available. So on that one, interesting experiment. When we opened it up, it was made a little more complicated in the desire of information, which is an excellent approach. And then we dropped the short. So some were very short. Some were in the first wave and the second wave. Some people wrote 2 sentences, and that's a point of view. I went to have lunch. The Burger Shack has been closed because of pandemic. I am upset. That is a point of view. So is a 2,000-word essay about food that's important that you should read. It's on the website. All these are available. Everything I'm talking about is available right now. The second wave, much longer form. So there's about the same, about 60 different points of view from widely different perspectives from around the world. But the second wave, because we changed the construct, a little more complicated, no limit, longer form. So there's a lot more words written in the second wave. So it's actually bigger than the first wave. And it's rich. It's rich. It hasn't been analyzed yet. We missed an opportunity here to get some of the wave textual information, working with Kate and Wendy and Cindy in knowledge graphs to drive those in. That project will come. We'll take everything we've done and we'll run it through Sensemaker to see what comes out of it, see what matches. Now, it's not 50,000 stories and 83 feet of text, but it's a very interesting structure on when you run something through a virtual think tank like the Grey Swan Guild. The other experiment, this weekly news wrap, at first it looks trivial because it's just a news wrap, and it doesn't get interesting really unless you do it all year. So the group of us invented a construct that each week we take a look back. We look back to look forward. We broke it down using lenses. So just like the Grey Swan Guild uses lenses as a way of organizing information quickly, the live, love, lead, learn, and liminal lenses organize information a certain way. There's another 8 set of lenses that go beneath that. In this project, we created the good, the bad, the ugly at first. Then we added the great. So a great set of things. So in each case of the section of our newspaper, our newsletter, is the great, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So 3 news articles that are related to that. We're evolving this structure each week. It changes a little bit, but there's always those 4 sections. There's always 3 stories. We don't just copy paste in these things. We write analysis and how we thread together. We've got a new member helping us on the wrap named Howard Fields. He did a great thing. I remember what he did because we took the wrap and we were talking about it. He said, these are really great, but they're separate. You need to connect the dots inside each wrap. So now we're writing across those 4 sections, picking these news articles across the lenses, and then trying to connect the dots with them. And the other point of discipline in the evolution, and this is Augustine and Howard have outlined, is after we do the wrap, we present it in Clubhouse and we talk about it in a group, which again forces the construct in a recursive way. It makes the construct more interesting in its construction. So right now that's been going on and we evolve, but there's some extra pieces we've added. So there's design that happens and we've added chunks to this. So we not only do news articles like the blocking of the Suez Canal, or someone famous or favorite of Augustine's, anything to do with Bitcoin or drones, and when you're presenting these things, or about nuclear physics. It's like always nuclear physics because they're important. So these threads are together now. We've added memes, lexicon, graphs. So now we've got the sort of pattern that we do each week. Well, that's 52 times in a year. We've been doing this since January. We've got 13 of them now. Each of the article blurbs is a point of view. If we think that the most important thing this week is a problem with vaccinations or concert experiments going on in Europe, that's a point of view. So we're collecting across 52 weeks, 624 of those. There'll be with the added pieces of the memes and the virtual, the viral videos and the lexicon, we'll have over 1,000 objects of information that I call no-bits that we'll have together that we're just beginning to analyze.
Rob, are you using any tools to do that, or are you just using your mind and to see those connections, or is there AI involved or anything like that?
So right now we're using the fundamental AI technique is to use people until we figure it out. So the AI brain, and that's such a great question, Lori. The AI brain, there's a brain to it. There is a process to it in order to get 8 people kind of working the same way. Because one of the other things, the way we've done the loop is that each week a different lead editor really writes the wrap, and then we all just sit back and edit it. So each week it's a different writer. So when we were inventing it, we're trying to think about, well, how is it going to look the same each week? Because it could go off in very different paths, like the POVs do. They go in wide different paths, which is interesting. But when we create this sort of algorithm, that's the AI part. So there is a little algorithm that could be automated that could nudge people to do this as prompts to get them to write a certain way. We're just kind of inventing that. So things like deep learning and machine learning, they were invented by computer scientists working with neuroscientists, asking neuroscientists, well, how does that brain thing work again? Can you tell me? And they wrote it down for about 30 years, 20 years before it turned into purely software. So I'm looking forward, Laurie, to using AI techniques against this constructed sort of closed garden. The most obvious things we can do are some things around knowledge graphs and some other lexical analysis that we could do against it. I'm a computer scientist and a card-carrying geek. I'm really interested in this form because it's processable. It's quicker to process. It's all tagged already. It's formed. It limits the sort of creativity that goes on, but I don't know what the machine will create in the end of it. So this is part of what I've learned from the people in the Grey Swan Guild is it doesn't have to. As we're making sense and I'm making a memory here, it may be used by somebody else. I've got a good idea that Wendy Elford is much more likely to find a use in this than our construct because we don't have enough of the Cynefin method and Sensemaking method in our team yet, but we have enough to build the body of information that's getting bigger and bigger. So if anybody here is interested, write a story. It can be 2 lines, like my Burger Shack story. We've got they're varying interests across the gamut. Sean mentioned earlier that there is a study going on homes that's kind of overlapped inside the guild, outside the guild. There's a liminal study going on, or a set of work going on around that area. There's the news and current events. So you can always share here. I'm going to share my slides at the end of this so that these are all links all throughout this that you guys can have as information. In creating this as a kind of memory, again, recursion to always create memories with memories with memories. So you can just click on this and submit a story to us and we'll see where it fits, or you could join the RAP team as well. One of the things that's very, very true for me when I realized and it was announced there was a pandemic and that the energy of the earth as we stop things, especially when we stop things, it reminded me of another crisis that I'd been in my life. 9/11 in the year 2000, I was in New York when the disaster occurred there. And the idea of post-traumatic stress being true and kicking in survival instincts, it's very true that those experiences 20 years ago connected with what we're doing here. And just like 20 years later, we're talking about 9/11 and then the U.S. policy of move the troops out of Afghanistan on 9/11 20 years later isn't lost on me in knitting a story together. So I believe that with that intensity, the next 20 years, because this pandemic isn't over yet, we'll be talking and processing what happened here. When I listened to Cheryl and its team of lawyers and Dr. Furcan and earlier this morning and Sean and predictions of the future, I know that we'll be talking about this for at least 20 years. And if Ringing Around the Rosie and A Pocket Full of Posies is true, we'll be talking about this for 100 years. So we're just beginning our sense making. And I think that we should all together make more memories together. So there's with fun stuff. I've got nothing left today. I'm finishing a little bit early, just a little bit early. I'd like to know from the people here if there's anything that's resonated or anything you'd like to know more of, another story you'd like to tell. I know that Daniel's got a big interest in food.
Yeah, I'll just speak to that in the context of for those who weren't around for Wave 1 of Grey Swan Guild. And this ties to sort of the balance of structure and chaos. So Rob, you alluded to the fact that you can't be confined because you're just a born wild card and an enthusiast to 500 words. But my approach, given that at the time at the scale that we were at, with a few exceptions, generally the guidance was 500 words as the cap, optimized to that. So actually introducing constraints into an inherently creative venture worked well for me because I'm going to divulge some personal information. My most annoying trait is that I'm a slow eater and I'm an optimizer, and I've done this since I was a child. So if T-bone steak is on there, all the potatoes and the coleslaw and the corn and everything else is getting done, and the last bite is always the best bite. So that's actually aligned to my editorial flow, which is quite agile in its process. So with the constraint of the 500 words, effectively what I did is I architected an entire book. I'd gone to about 800 words originally, and then the constraint was introduced. So I had to rewrite the whole thing and make the best of 498 words or thereabouts to fit into the format of the time with the end goal in mind. So I think the point of the story is that there is a lot of value in optimizing in the midst of constraints, even when the objective is to have unconstrained creativity. So it's sort of that structure versus chaos, which is important because as we celebrate our first year, that has been sort of a balancing act as we find our footing. And are we a club? Are we a full organization? Are we in between? What kind of diversity can we have in the experience so people can find value points, and how structured do we need to be to operate effectively versus how much do we want this to be a platform for diversity and creativity? So that's sort of my interpretation in the context of being put on deck to talk about my interest in food. Ironically, I've lost 35 pounds in the last year.
COVID-19 silver lining.
With a little assistance that was unplanned. And I've also supported the mass food industry by still having at least 35 pounds of the 40-pound white flour bag I bought from Costco during the toilet paper craze.
We all bake bread. We all bake bread. We all bake bread.
Yeah, absolutely. So I invite everyone who has an interest in putting their thoughts on paper and is not going to ball it up and maybe wants a platform, to engage with us. And I think that's something that can still continue because that is food for thought and the synthesis of and connection of dots of thought that is the process of sense making here at Grey Swan Guild going into year 2.
So I see Sylvia posting, and I want to invite you, Sylvia, to talk a little bit about the real-time memory making that you invented. I remember we did a session with Sean, and we ended up in the same breakout room. And at the end of that breakout room, we wrote the first rap. Do you remember, Sylvia? That was the inspiration for the weekly rap. That session where you and I, and there were 2 other people and Sean, and then we turned out something that was a real good summary. But I want to talk a little bit about memory making and the virtual journal too.
Thank you for inviting me to talk, and thank you really for the session today. I think it really resonates, and that's also what the journal is trying to capture, like all the different type of memories we can make through all our brain circuits. Some are really like based on senses, some are based on analysis of news, for example, and some are based sometimes on trauma memories, which you've been talking a little at the beginning about. So I didn't want to spam. I just wanted to send a few links if you're interested in participating for all the poets in the room, or if you want to share some music, because we were discussing music as well. And I'd love to hear more about your soundtrack of the pandemic or of the year. What soothes you or what maybe energizes you. Feel free to share. So there are many prompts and many topic you might want to contribute to.
Thank you, Sylvia. I see Elaine there, and Elaine hasn't had a chance to share, but I know that part of the backbone of what makes us collect things quickly and present them to the world is our website. And Elaine has designed our website, and the beautiful look to it and the accessibility of everything is from her. And I wanted to get a couple of comments from you, Elaine, on your design intent and how you do things with us in making sure we don't fall off the edge of the world. Is that okay, Elaine?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So you want me to share what? I came in late, so I'm not sure where you guys where to pick up.
We're talking about making memories, and part of how we make memories of the Guild is our wonderful, beautiful website that you designed and the process that you do to keep it up to date. So I was wondering what some of your design intent and your background as you set it up, because I know that you work behind the scenes all the time, and it's a great amount of work to make us look as consistent as you do.
Thanks. I don't know what the comment is that you're looking for. Sorry if I'm.
When we're doing a new thing like this, we just did the setup very quickly for the Day of the Swan in a couple of weeks. Can you talk about this is the making the backroom recipe part where we don't the cooking show where we tell the secrets. What was your design intent to keep us aligned? I know you've got a set of rules about messaging and positioning and how we do things, but you do them automatically for us. But can you talk about them a little bit? Why our website looks so great and why things are so organized?
Oh, okay. Well, thank you. I'm glad that you like it. I guess it's very important to me to have to keep things simple and to provide as consistent brand experience and user experience as possible. I work closely with Jill on this because she's, being a fellow marketer / designer, she totally gets the importance of using consistent look and feel and colors. So I get ideas from her. I think she might get some ideas from the website as well, some inspiration. And I just use Wix because I'm a amateur web designer, so I appreciate the templates they have. And then I go to the live website and I just put myself in the shoes of the person who might be there, and I just try and make sure that I've answered questions or provided links or made things clear that will be aligned with their likely journey. And then, of course, I get tons of feedback from everybody in the Guild. They give me all kinds of, they're my QA team and inspiration and ideas.
So the amazing part about the spirit of the Guild is a large, hard commitments are anywhere from an hour a month to 10 hours a week is kind of the range that goes on. And then we're able to do things when you look at some of the materials and some of the things that we do and get together. We are using these techniques of aligning quickly, picking relatively simple ways of doing it to push things out. And then the magic from Jill and Sean and Elaine in the marketing is that we have this consistent look and feel. So that at the end of the year, so I was looking backwards for the last year, and I'm like, oh, I can just cut and paste anything, and it looks like a new publication again because of that design intent. And it's magical. And then Laura, you had said earlier, what AI do we have? When we've got Sylvia, automatic futurist AI who writes in fiction, those stories just fit in. They keep fitting in as we turn the crank. And then there's not that something doesn't fall out the edge that doesn't fit. That happens too. But I know that when you look back a year, the consistency is remarkable of how clear it is. And then that's, I'm looking forward in with the surprising curiosity that usually comes with my life to what's coming up next. As we look backwards, that's to go forwards. Now, Lori, you've been helping earlier and you're newer to the Guild. And I thank you for helping us on this. You've got experience running conferences that are bigger than this with a different aspect. What are some of your thoughts on what we've been doing, what you've been doing, maybe share some tips and tricks to get us all better, because I know you know a lot about how to do this. Thanks.
Yeah, well, I'm really interested in not seeing talking heads, and I'm really interested in engagement and takeaways and call to action, because we've spent years and years and years people going to conferences and listening, and that's just really not enough. We want people to let us know, or at least did they what did their opinion change, or did their ideas change, or did their mindsets change because they participated? Did they meet somebody that they didn't know, and maybe they'll create a new partnership or a new friendship? Were they inspired to take action, and what would that action be? So those are the types of things that I'm trying to instill into the events that I participate in. And I'm voting with my feet. I'm not going to conferences anymore if it's just going to be a bunch of people telling me what they think. And the other piece is that how do we, like the format that we have now is kind of an unconference. The members of this whole organization, which isn't even an organization, it's a collective of people who have come together with mindsets that are sort of melding a little bit. And so that unconference format where the members bring their knowledge experience to the other members, to me, is very intriguing. And I really appreciate this format, because you aren't getting a top-down message, you're getting an all-around message, in my opinion.
Thank you so much, Lori. That's really great that you bring. This is classic sort of Grey Swan spirit. We bring new genetics in. We use the same techniques of the coronavirus, except we're doing it for the opposite purpose, to live. And that's great advice. I've gone. I don't even want to know how many conferences I've been to. I don't want to know how many hundreds of thousands of people that I've met around the world. I love doing it. This construct is different, but I love this sort of flat thing. I love meeting new people like this. I love seeing my old friends again, like Luke, who I haven't seen in such a long time. We did some work together on the street back when New York was big. Still big right now, but you're in Boston now, right, Luke?
Yep, the pandemic has changed me from a two-city person to a one-city person. So I'm in Boston Seaport area, and fortunate to have kind of gone through the last 15 months pretty healthy and spirits intact.
Good to see you, Luke. I know we've always had a good time. I'm looking forward to catching up in a more detailed way soon.
Yes,
Any thoughts or feedback that you'd like to give the team, or from your perspective of what you've been doing in the last year?
Just to piggyback on something Laurie said, when you go to a conference, it takes maybe as much energy after you leave the conference to try to extract something from it. You spent 3 days somewhere, you did something, and I was always like you, I was hell-bent to make sure something came out of it. And that's when I started walking with my feet. I said, wow, it's actually double the cost of time to kind of, maybe my time could be used in better places. So anything interactive, I'm sure you all have been part of, there's a platform called Icebreaker. It's just a very, very different engagement model. And maybe it's the pandemic that spawned it, and people are just tired of talking heads or Zoom panels, but it's, at the end of the day, we're people. And, I'm just a big believer in 1 + 1 = 3. And if you're sitting there by yourself, you don't have the +1 to equal 3 with.
Thanks for that, Luke. I appreciate it. I know one of the techniques, I've run a lot of software companies, and one of the techniques I have in the companies is I go in and I always eliminate the hour-long meeting. If that's the standard, I change it to half an hour. I've saved people hundreds of millions of dollars in their companies and created hundreds of millions of dollars from that simple technique. I've just changed that practice now that Zoom is here. And now that I do so much meetings face-to-face, I've brought back the 1 hour meeting. I still do half-hour meetings. I either give 15 minutes back, or I'm taking 15 minutes to just say, how are you? And replace that stuff, because like everybody, I'm sure on this call, we can all do back-to-backs and just go drop in, and it's super addictive to just drop in, right? The catalyst method, just do everything. But to add that human part is what my mission is for the rest of the year, is keep being human. And I'll leave you with that, and maybe no other poems, but remember Ring Around the Posy. Someone's going to invent the poem that our kids will be singing 100 years from now. Maybe it'll be Sylvia's kids that write that poem, or maybe Shannon's friends that write that poem. over to you. Thank you so much for your time. I honor everybody who shared time with me today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Much appreciated for that very thoughtful presentation and discussion. I just put up here on the slide that if you're not a member, please consider joining. If you want to give your feedback, there's an email, davetheswan.org. And we have a pretty vibrant community on Clubhouse, although I'm on Android, so I really have no idea how vibrant it is. But I think some of the people on this call can attest to that. I put the links from this slide into the chat. And Rob already shared the Find Us slide. So I'm going to, if there's no other last comments, anyone want to have a last word? Then I'm going to stop recording this session and I'm going to start recording the next session.